When the I-Team started looking inside this Chicago case in 2014, the war was still a long way off. Now, tonight, we're told Firtash denounces the Russian invasion and denies reports he has ties to Vladimir Putin or links to Russian organized crime, calling those lies and smears. Firtash says he's asked American officials for permission to leave Austria and return to Ukraine, where his industrial plants, he says, have all been transformed into defense production. Rob, that comes even as Chicago prosecutors continue the push for Firtash's extradition here. Well, he was in Vienna, Austria because he has business there, and that's where he was arrested. So for the last 9 years or so, he's been under what amounts to house arrest. Not really tough conditions. It's a mansion with high walls, heavy security. He can still come and go as long as he doesn't leave Austria, because if he does that, then the U.S. would be able to arrest him. This court case and this extradition play is happening in the courts in Austria. So until all of this is decided and either he's cut loose or the U.S. government manages to put him in handcuffs and onto a plane, he is stuck. Well, he's not Russian, he's Ukrainian, so there are no sanctions against the money that he has amassed. He does have $174 million that he's had to fork over as bond. I mean, that's the biggest bond in Austrian history, probably the biggest I've ever heard of. So he's turned that money over just so he can remain free in Austria. Not much of a dent for somebody who has the wealth that he does, from what I'm told, but nevertheless, that's a lot of dough. Well, if he were to jump bond, which isn't very likely at this point at least, he's been on the hook for the last 8 or 9 years, and he really just doesn't want to come to the United States and to Chicago to stand trial on these charges, because he thinks if that were to happen, he runs a fair chance of ending up going to prison. He doesn't trust what would happen to him if he came here, and so that's why he's hired all of these high-priced attorneys in Chicago and Washington, D.C. to try to prevent that from happening. Well, there have been ups and downs in this when the experts have thought there would be no way that he would ever be sent to the United States, to Chicago, a city that he claims, and it would seem he's never even been to as a visitor, much less a businessman. And then there are times when the Austrian government appears ready to just get rid of him and send him on his way. They have no stake in this case against him in Chicago. The experts now are looking at this and saying, you know, maybe the clock is running and at some point it will run out, and the witnesses and the evidence are going to be so old as the clock continues that the government here in the U.S. will just end up saying enough is enough and drop the charges. Boeing has never put anybody out there for an interview. They've been a couple of degrees removed from the crux of the case. They're not named in the paperwork. Nobody has ever officially said that Boeing was in fact at kind of the end of the gravy train here in this titanium bribery deal. And so we've never heard from them. Probably wise corporate communications at this point, considering that they aren't named in the actual legal papers. Well, if you're a criminal defense lawyer, you would love to have a client who's able to pay whatever the bill looks like at the end of the week, at the end of the month, and pay all your travel expenses to Europe for meetings with him to figure out your legal strategy, despite the fact that he's put up $174 million bail, or maybe because he's able to put that kind of money up. If you're a criminal defense attorney, Dan Webb, for instance, who's his lead attorney in Chicago, Lanny Davis in Washington, D.C., who's been representing him, and others along the way, you see that this is a client who can pay the bill.